In the boundless sprawl of the Imperium of man, where billions live and die unnoticed by history, there rise towers of despair and industry, hive cities. These titanic bastions pierce the atmosphere, blackening the skies with fumes and prayers. They are monuments not to prosperity but to survival. Each hive is a tomb that breathes, a machine of endless hunger where flesh feeds steel and steel commands flesh. Life here is not lived, it is spent. Born from necessity and sustained by indoctrination, hive cities are the industrial hearts of countless worlds, grinding out war material, servitors, and soldiers in service to the Emperor's eternal war. They are places of unrelenting labour, where the air is thick with smog, the walls sweat rust, and every sound is a hymn to machinery. There is no retirement in a hive, there is only purpose, and then there is silence. To understand the Imperium is to understand the hive, not the glittering spires but the furnace at its core. What follows is a descent into that abyss, into the rot and the ritual, the devotion and the despair. Welcome to the hive. Breathe deep and don't expect to come back clean. The concept of hive cities originates from one of the most ambitious chapters in human history, the Age of Technology, a period marked by monumental advances in engineering, terraforming and societal organisation. As humanity expanded across the stars, planets once barren or hostile were transformed through massive planetary engineering projects, enabling sustainable habitation. These early megastructures were designed not merely as population centres, but as self-sufficient industrial behemoths optimised for production and survival, on worlds ravaged by war, environmental decay, or resource scarcity. The earliest hive designs emerged from the need to consolidate population and industry into compact, defensible spaces that could sustain the immense demands of an interstellar empire. Blueprints from this era reveal a layered approach to construction, where industrial zones, residential blocks and civic centres were stacked vertically to maximise limited planetary real estate. These designs integrated advanced materials like plasteel and ceramite composites, along with imported adamantium reinforcements, enabling buildings to reach dizzying heights and depths. The founding architects of hive cities were not specific individuals, but rather Terran engineers who utilised STC patterns, standard technology cards, during the Age of Technology. These engineers, while possibly not architects in the modern sense, were responsible for the large-scale design and construction of these massive self-contained cities. The STC patterns provided blueprints for the construction of hive cities, allowing for their rapid development and expansion. Their role extended beyond engineering. They dictated the socio-political structures embedded in the very fabric of the hive, embedding rigid hierarchies and control mechanisms to maintain order among the millions who would inhabit these towering cities. The socio-political roots of hive cities can be traced back to the early governance models of Terra, where industrial and population pressures had already forced humanity to rethink urban living. Initially, these cities were meant to support burgeoning industrial complexes and military manufacturing hubs, vital to the defence and expansion of the Imperium. Founding figures, often influential planetary governors or mechanicus lords, saw these constructs as solutions to planetary overpopulation and resource depletion. The original purposes were twofold: to maximise industrial throughput while simultaneously housing vast labour forces under strict regulation. Terraforming played a crucial role in this vision. Planets unsuitable for traditional settlement underwent atmospheric modification, seismic stabilisation, and soil enrichment, all overseen by mechanised systems integrated into hive design. Over centuries, these early hives evolved, their blueprints refined with each generation to incorporate lessons learned from environmental challenges and socio-political unrest. During the Age of Strife, when many human worlds fell into isolation and chaos, hive cities became bastions of order and production, albeit often at the expense of personal freedom and living conditions. Their layered design became more pronounced, with upper spires reserved for elite administrators and the lower levels sinking into dense, squalid zones. These vertical strata became microcosms of the Imperial society, each with distinct functions, privileges, and strict social codes enforced by militarized enforcers. Thus, the foundation of hive cities was not merely a feat of engineering, but a complex synthesis of technological ambition, social control and existential necessity. The age of technology's rapid expansion required not only physical construction, but an unprecedented logistical and engineering framework. Hive cities were engineered as vertical ecosystems, incorporating both the natural environment and artificial life support systems to sustain immense populations. Early terraforming projects transformed planets with hostile atmospheres by installing atmospheric processors, temperature regulators, and magnetosphere stabilizers. These systems were often housed within the initial hive cores, massive layered spires known as manufactorums, that served as the beating heart of the hive's industrial output. These manufactorums were engineered to run continuously, processing raw materials mined from the planet or imported from orbital facilities, churning out everything from war machines to ration synths. The materials used in construction, plasteel and ceramite among them, were selected for their durability and resistance to corrosion and impact. In some instances, early hives incorporated bioengineered elements such as adaptive skin-like polymers designed to seal structural breaches automatically or repair minor damage without human intervention. These early experiments in integrating biotechnology with architecture marked the beginning of what would become the hive's defining characteristic: the fusion of machine, organism, and environment. Founding figures in hive city development were often tech priests, but also high-ranking imperial administrators and military planners who saw the potential to solve multiple crises at once: resource shortages, growing populations, and external threats. One notable example is Magos architect Dominus Kyrios Valmar, credited with pioneering the design principles behind Hive Primus on the Forge world of Metallica. His approach emphasized modular construction, allowing the city to expand both upward and downward as needed. Valmar's design was also notable for its incorporation of redundant life support systems, recognizing that a hive's sustainability depended on resilience to siege, disaster, or internal collapse. He advocated a rigid caste system integrated into the hive's layout, the upper spires reserved for governance, the middle layers for skilled labour and technologists, and the vast underhive zones for unskilled workers and penal populations. This structuring, though harsh, was viewed as necessary for maintaining production efficiency and social order. Such socio-architectural planning reflected the Imperium's broader values: duty, sacrifice, and unquestioning loyalty, reinforced through a combination of mechanical automation and religious indoctrination centered on the cult Mechanicus. The socio-political environment in which these cities grew was defined by the slow decline of centralized planetary governance during the Age of Strife. Following the collapse of the great galactic empires and the loss of communication between worlds, many hive cities became isolated fiefdoms ruled by powerful guildmasters or Mechanicus lords. The imperatives of survival meant that these rulers exercised near absolute control, often enforcing labour quotas with brutal discipline. The population's role was narrowly defined as cogs within the hive's vast machinery, their lives measured by their output and utility. Educational systems within hives were tailored toward indoctrination and vocational training, ensuring each individual knew their place and function. Those who excelled could sometimes ascend to supervisory roles, but such advancement was rare and typically involved increased surveillance and ideological conformity. Social mobility was constrained not only by policy, but also by the hive's physical structure. The sheer scale and vertical stratification limited interaction between castes, creating isolated social ecosystems. As a result, cultural identities within different hive layers diverged, with the underhive often developing distinct dialects, customs, and even religious sects divergent from the Mechanicus orthodoxy above. The development of hive cities through the Age of Strife also brought about significant architectural and engineering innovations. Structural designs increasingly incorporated defense mechanisms to counter internal rebellions and external threats, including thick blast shields, automated turrets, and energy barriers integrated into hive walls. These cities became fortresses as much as industrial hubs. Engineers devised complex traffic systems to manage the flow of millions of inhabitants, utilizing conveyor belts, maglev rails, and vast networks of vertical lifts known as elevator shafts. These systems were vital for maintaining production schedules and supplying food and water across the hive's vertical expanse. Water recycling and waste management were critical challenges. Closed-loop systems filtered and repurposed waste products, often through biomechanical processes overseen by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Failures in these systems could lead to catastrophic health crises, making their maintenance a priority. The layering of the hive also reflected social stratification. The upper levels had access to filtered water, rationed nutrient packs, and clean air, while lower tiers received recycled, often contaminated supplies, reinforcing the class divide through basic survival resources. The Age of Strife's lasting impact on hive design is evident in the emphasis on redundancy, self-sufficiency, and control. The Imperium's fragmented communication meant hives had to operate semi-autonomously, requiring their own governance structures, military forces, and industrial capabilities. Some hives evolved into city-states, with their own laws, militias, and even political intrigue. Yet this independence was always balanced by loyalty to the Imperium's ideals, enforced by embedded ecclesiarchy chapels and Adeptus Arbit's outposts. Religious devotion, particularly to the Emperor and the machine god, permeated every aspect of hive life, justifying the harsh conditions and fostering obedience. Thus, the hive city was never merely a physical construct, but a socio-religious machine designed to produce not only material but also ideological conformity. Its foundations laid during the Age of Technology and hardened in the crucible of the Age of Strife, the hive city would become the dominant urban form of the Imperium, encapsulating its contradictions: technological brilliance and oppressive hierarchy, resilience and decay, life and death. The Adeptus Mechanicus played a critical role in both the conceptualization and execution of the earliest hive cities. This ecclesiastic organization, devoted to the worship and preservation of technology, not only provided the technical expertise, but also maintained strict ideological control over the construction processes. Magi and tech priests oversaw every stage of development, from the mining of raw materials to the calibration of terraforming apparatus and the fine-tuning of manufactorum operations. Their influence extended beyond the purely technical, dictating social order within the hive itself. The cult Mechanicus instilled a reverence for machinery and industrial labour, presenting the hive's relentless production as a sacred duty to the machine god. This belief system shaped the hive's culture from the outset, reinforcing hierarchical divisions by sanctifying the upper tiers as closer to divine power and condemning the underhive as regions of decay and heresy. Many early founding figures were simultaneously religious and scientific leaders, blurring the line between technological innovation and ritual practice. One notable figure in the early development of hive cities beyond the initial architects was Archimagos Dominus Felkios Draven, whose influence extended during the transitional period at the tail end of the Age of Technology and into the Age of Strife. Draven was responsible for pioneering energy redistribution systems that allowed hive complexes to scale upward dramatically. By introducing advanced cogitator networks and self-regulating power conduits, he enabled hive structures to maintain stable environmental controls across thousands of levels, an engineering feat critical to supporting ever larger populations. Draven's personal history is marked by both remarkable successes and profound failures. His methods often bordered on dangerous experimentation, pushing machine spirits to their limits and occasionally triggering catastrophic system failures. His reputation was controversial, praised for technical genius but criticized for reckless disregard of worker safety. His role embodied the tension within hive development, the relentless push for expansion and efficiency versus the human cost of sustaining such enormous populations in often precarious conditions. The founding of the first hive cities coincided with intense socio-political upheaval during the Age of Strife. As the collapse of interstellar trade and communication severed planetary ties, many hive settlements initially established as mining and manufacturing centres became self-governing entities. This transformation often led to the rise of powerful guilds and ruling families who controlled labour forces, access to resources, and hive infrastructure. These emergent powers formed complex social hierarchies, frequently enforced through private security forces or militant worker militias. The autonomy of such hives was fragile, often challenged by internal dissent and external raiders exploiting weakened planetary defences. Within this volatile environment, governance required balancing resource extraction and production efficiency with maintaining order amid growing populations pressed into harsh living and working conditions. The ruling classes leveraged religious dogma, particularly the worship of the emperor and the machine god, as a tool to legitimize their authority and suppress rebellion. The architecture of early hive cities reflected their dual nature as industrial behemoths and social organisms. Initial blueprints emphasized modularity and redundancy, with each sector capable of independent operation should others fail. Construction prioritized vertical layering as a means to conserve limited planetary surface space and protect key facilities from surface threats, such as extreme weather or hostile fauna. The upper tiers were typically reserved for administrative complexes, elite residences, and religious sanctuaries, built from high-grade plasteel and armoured ceramite alloys, designed to withstand bombardment and internal sabotage. Lower tiers, constructed with more basic materials and often pieced together from scavenged debris, housed mass worker dormitories, manufacture. This vertical stratification created profound differences in environmental quality. Upper levels had access to filtered air, reliable water supplies, and nutrient-rich synthetic food, whereas lower strata endured contaminated atmospheres, polluted water recycling systems, and rationed protein pastes of questionable quality. Despite the hierarchical division, all levels were interconnected through an elaborate network of elevators, conveyors, and ventilation shafts, underscoring the hive's interdependence despite its social disparities. Terraforming efforts were an integral part of early hive city construction, particularly on planets with hostile environments. Atmospheric processes could filter and modify poisonous gases, while subterranean heat exchangers stabilized extreme temperature fluctuations. Magnetic field generators shielded the hive from solar radiation spikes. These planetary engineering feats allowed hive complexes to extend deep into the crust, where they could exploit mineral veins and geothermal energy sources. Founding blueprints often incorporated layered defense systems blending physical fortifications with automated defense turrets and sensor arrays. The Imperium's paranoia about infiltration and rebellion shaped every architectural decision. Many hives featured secret maintenance tunnels, emergency escape routes, and fail-safe lockdown protocols designed to isolate compromised sectors. These security measures, while effective, often further degraded living conditions for inhabitants trapped in isolated or penal zones, exacerbating tensions within the hive. The cultural identity of early hive inhabitants was deeply shaped by this harsh environment. The majority of the population was born into the hive, their worldview confined to endless corridors, mechanized factories, and the omnipresent hum of machinery. Daily life revolved around labour cycles regulated by production quotas, with recreational activities limited and heavily monitored. Over time, distinct subcultures emerged within the hive's layers, particularly in the underhive, where outcasts and penal populations created alternative communities with their own customs and belief systems. These groups often incorporated elements of forbidden technology worship, primitive rituals, and violent territorial disputes. Despite this, many workers embraced the hive's religious ethos, viewing their toil as a sacred contribution to the Imperium's survival. This mix of despair and devotion was a defining characteristic of hive society, producing individuals who were simultaneously resigned to hardship and fiercely loyal to their collective identity. In terms of governance and law enforcement, the earliest hives saw the establishment of layered control systems combining bureaucratic oversight with militarized policing. Adeptus Arbit's agents worked alongside Mechanicus enforcers to maintain order, often using brutal methods to suppress dissent. Labour discipline was maintained through a complex system of rewards and punishments, including forced labour assignments, ration reductions, and exile to hazardous underhive zones. These enforcement strategies were justified by the perceived necessity of sustaining uninterrupted production in a galaxy beset by endless war and chaos. Despite these harsh realities, some early hive leaders attempted to implement limited social welfare programs, such as basic medical care and education, though these were typically reserved for upper castes and skilled workers. This disparity reinforced social stratification and contributed to simmering unrest that would periodically erupt into violent uprisings during the Age of Strife. By the end of the Age of Strife, hive cities had firmly established themselves as the dominant urban form within the Imperium. Their initial purposes as centres of production resource extraction and population containment had expanded to encompass governance, religious observance, and military coordination. The technological innovations and architectural feats achieved during this period laid the foundation for their future growth, even as many hives suffered from neglect, decay, and internal conflict. The legacy of their founding, marked by a blend of technological mastery, religious zealotry, and ruthless pragmatism, continues to define the Imperium's relationship with its hive populations across countless worlds. The Age of Strife introduced systemic challenges that tested the resilience of early hive cities. With the collapse of the Astronomicon, planetary communication links severed, and warp storms isolating entire sectors, many hives became isolated city-states forced to fend for themselves. This isolation hindered supply chains, delayed essential repairs, and strained the distribution of critical resources like clean water, power, and food rations. The growing populations, which early architects had planned for in theoretical models, quickly overwhelmed the original infrastructural designs. Power grids became overloaded, and air filtration systems operated beyond intended capacities, increasing the frequency of mechanical failures. These stresses exposed the fragility beneath the impressive technological veneer, prompting hives to evolve operational redundancies, self-repair protocols, and contingency plans to maintain vital functions. Yet despite these adaptations, many hives entered cycles of slow decay, with certain lower tiers slipping into neglect and becoming breeding grounds for disease, crime, and rebellion. The breakdown in imperial governance also transformed the socio-political landscape of hive populations. Without centralized control, many hives saw the rise of local warlords, gang leaders, and technocratic cults asserting dominance. These figures often exploited the religious fervor instilled by the Mechanicus, manipulating sacred rites and machine worship to legitimize their rule. At times, factions within the hive engaged in protracted conflicts for control of vital resources such as power nodes, manufactorums, or water reservoirs. Such conflicts often escalated into outright warfare, resulting in severe structural damage and mass casualties. The political instability forced many hives to invest heavily in internal security apparatuses, including mercenary enforcers and automated defense systems. However, these measures frequently alienated lower-tier populations, increasing resentment and fostering cycles of unrest. One of the most notorious examples of hive governance during the Age of Strife was the rise of Hive Tertium's guildmaster Varric Decilus. Originally a skilled engineer and labour organiser, Decilus leveraged his knowledge of hive infrastructure to consolidate power. Under his rule, Hive Tertium saw a period of brutal efficiency, with labour productivity reaching unprecedented levels through a strict caste enforcement regime and ruthless suppression of dissent. However, his reign was marked by widespread human rights abuses, including forced conscription of lower caste workers into hazardous industrial tasks and mass exile to the underhive. Decilus's tenure ended violently when a coalition of rebel factions, supported by rogue Adeptus Mechanicus elements disillusioned by his corruption, orchestrated a massive uprising. The aftermath left Hive Tertium scarred, its manufactorums crippled and infrastructure partially collapsed, a vivid illustration of the Age of Strife's destructive legacy. Despite these turbulent conditions, the Age of Strife also saw innovations in architectural and engineering solutions aimed at countering decline. Some hives experimented with modular construction, allowing damaged sections to be isolated and rebuilt without disrupting the entire city's operations. Others developed advanced waste recycling systems to cope with increasing population densities, incorporating biofiltration techniques and chemical neutralizers to maintain minimal environmental health standards. Terraforming technology also advanced with new generations of atmospheric processors capable of better mitigating toxic emissions and stabilizing microclimates within the hive environment. These improvements, often spearheaded by isolated Adeptus Mechanicus enclaves, helped many hives stave off complete collapse and provided the technological base upon which the later Imperium would rebuild. Culturally, the Age of Strife intensified the hive's unique social fabric. The isolation and hardship created a profound sense of local identity among inhabitants, distinct from imperial doctrine yet inseparable from its religious framework. Legends of heroic figures, engineers who saved entire sections from collapse, warrior priests who fought off underhive incursions, or labourers who defied caste restrictions became integral to hive lore. These stories served to maintain morale and reinforce the values of sacrifice and endurance. Meanwhile, the everyday lifestyle of hive citizens hardened. Scarcity bred ingenuity in surviving with limited resources, and the hive's physical environment shaped behaviour and social norms. Work shifts were relentless, recreational spaces were few and heavily controlled, and family structures adapted to the constraints of space and security. The founding of hive cities and their development through this era laid the groundwork for the Imperium's enduring relationship with these sprawling megastructures. The complexities of maintaining a balance between production demands, population welfare, and security continue to define hive management. Their architecture stands as a testament to human ingenuity, yet simultaneously as a monument to the immense social and technological pressures faced in sustaining human life on such an industrial scale. The legacy of the Age of Strife's challenges remains evident in the persistent inequalities and infrastructural vulnerabilities found in many hive worlds today. Nevertheless, hive cities endure, evolving through cycles of decay and renewal, forever central to the Imperium's survival and expansion. The expansion of hive cities after their initial foundation was both a necessity and a byproduct of the Imperium's relentless drive for industrial output and population management. Their growth was vertical and horizontal, constrained by the planetary surface but propelled upwards through towering spires, immense manufactorums, and stacked hab units. Architecturally, hive cities became a labyrinthine mesh of layers, each designed for a specific function within the broader urban ecosystem. The upper tiers typically housed the administrative centres, noble estates, and ecclesiarchal temples, structured to project power and maintain order. These areas featured more advanced construction materials, ceramite reinforcements, adamantium supports, and bio-resin composites that could withstand both natural decay and frequent industrial stress. Lower down, the manufactorums sprawled across immense terraces and bridges, churning out war material, machine parts, and consumer goods. At the base, the underhive sprawled in chaotic tangles of crumbling infrastructure, forgotten tunnels, and rampant hazards. The internal logistics of hive cities posed a monumental engineering challenge. To keep millions or billions alive and working, systems for power distribution, water supply, waste disposal, and transportation had to operate continuously and efficiently. Power was generally sourced from fusion reactors and geothermal plants, buried deep beneath the hive foundations, feeding into complex grid networks insulated by redundant cabling and servo-regulated transformers. Water was recycled through multiple filtration stages, with closed-loop piping systems that reclaimed moisture from air, waste, and industrial byproducts. These processes were monitored and managed by cogitator hives, massive computational arrays maintained by tech priests to ensure operational stability. Waste disposal involved pneumatic systems that transported refuse to incinerators or recycling plants, though breakdowns often caused localized contamination and toxic zones. The vertical hierarchy of a hive city was more than architectural. It was social and economic stratification made manifest in steel and stone. At the apex lived planetary governors and the ecclesiarchy's high clergy, occupying secure, climate-controlled spires that were both palatial and fortified. Just below them were the trade consortiums and skilled artisans who maintained some degree of privilege and autonomy, often controlling crucial manufactorums or commercial hubs. The majority of the population, however, worked in the lower manufactorums and hab units, living in cramped, regulated quarters where space was a commodity and privacy nearly non-existent. The lowest tiers were relegated to the underhive, often forgotten or actively suppressed by the ruling elite. This caste system was rigid. Social mobility was rare and usually contingent on military conscription, apprenticeship under the Adeptus Mechanicus, or exceptional service recognized by hive administrators. Daily life within the hive varied dramatically by strata but shared common threads of discipline, routine, and survival. Labour shifts in manufactorums were long and grueling, often lasting 12 to 16 hours under the glow of artificial lighting and amid the constant noise of machinery. Workers wore hazard gear customised for their roles, exoskeletal suits augmented with pneumatic actuators for heavy lifting, respirators for toxic atmospheres, or insulated uniforms for thermal regulation near smelters. Law enforcement in Hive Cities was a multi-layered system, reflecting the complexity of maintaining order in such vast urban environments. The Adeptus Arbets served as the primary enforcers of Imperial law, particularly focusing on threats to political stability such as heresy, rebellion, or sabotage. Their presence was most concentrated in upper tiers and key industrial sectors, where swift and brutal suppression was deemed necessary. Complementing the Arbeites were the Magistratum's enforcer squads, who managed day-to-day policing, labour disputes, and minor criminality. These units often wore lighter armour, marked with Hive-specific insignia, and were more embedded in local politics and economies, sometimes leading to corruption or factionalism. Surveillance technology was omnipresent, ranging from servo-skull drones equipped with audio and visual monitoring to cogitator networks analysing behaviour patterns and communications. In high-risk zones, automated defence turrets and containment fields provided additional security layers. Freight corridors were designed for the rapid movement of raw materials and finished goods, segregated from pedestrian pathways to prevent accidents. The volume of daily traffic required sophisticated scheduling and control systems to avoid bottlenecks and maintain safety, particularly in manufacturums where delays could halt production lines. Additionally, drone fleets handled reconnaissance, courier duties, and hazard inspection, reducing human exposure to dangerous zones. Production centres were the beating heart of Hive Cities, organised to maximise output while managing resource scarcity. Manufacturums specialised in different sectors: weapons and armour fabrication, vehicle assembly, electronics production, and chemical synthesis among them. These centres operated continuously, often with minimal downtime for maintenance. Automated assembly lines integrated with skilled labour, where human workers performed precision tasks or supervised machine operation. Production quotas were enforced strictly, with failure punished severely by both administrative and ecclesiastical authorities. Trade within and between hives facilitated resource sharing and technology transfer, though often complicated by political rivalries and logistical challenges. Raw materials were imported through planetary ports or extracted from local mines, and finished goods flowed along designated trade routes to supply imperial armies, merchant fleets, and civilian markets. Living conditions within Hive Cities reflected the brutal realities of their design priorities. Hab units were stacked vertically to conserve space, often in tiers of hundreds of levels with minimal ventilation and lighting. Noise, pollution, and overcrowding were persistent issues, exacerbated by inadequate infrastructure in lower tiers. Sanitation systems operated near capacity, with failures leading to outbreaks of disease or toxic exposure. Living conditions within Hive Cities reflected the brutal realities of their design priorities. Hab units were stacked vertically to conserve space, often in tiers of hundreds of levels with minimal ventilation and lighting. Noise, pollution, and overcrowding were persistent issues, exacerbated by inadequate infrastructure in lower tiers. Sanitation systems operated near capacity, with failures leading to outbreaks of disease or toxic exposure. Hive labour systems within these towering cities were intricately organised to extract maximum productivity from their vast populations. Workforce deployment was tightly controlled by Hive administrators and the Adeptus Mechanicus, who oversaw the allocation of labourers to manufactorums, maintenance crews, security details, and support services. Skilled workers such as machine wrights, servitors, and tech priests were relatively few but held essential roles in sustaining Hive functions. Their specialised knowledge of cogitators, servo arms, and arcane machinery ensured the Hive's survival against constant mechanical failure. The majority of labourers, however, consisted of human workers subjected to relentless schedules with little opportunity for respite or advancement. Apprenticeships and trade schools existed but operated under strict supervision to maintain loyalty and control, with curriculum heavily weighted toward technical skill and imperial doctrine. The caste-like social hierarchy was enforced not only through architectural segregation, but also through administrative policies. Movement between strata was rare and generally involved military conscription or bureaucratic appointment rather than organic social mobility. Within the upper echelons, nobles and Adeptus Ministorum representatives wielded significant political influence, their status often reflected by exclusive access to resources and protective infrastructure. Mid-tier guildmasters and merchant lords managed manufactorums and commercial enterprises, balancing profit motives against rigid imperial mandates. The lower tiers were dominated by industrial workers, miners, and servitors, cybernetic constructs often repurposed from criminals or the deceased, who performed dangerous or menial tasks. This stratification was visibly marked by attire, personal equipment, and even physical modifications, such as implanted vox communicators or bio-enhanced limbs, all reflecting the wearer's social and occupational role. Mid-tier guildmasters and merchant lords managed manufactorums and commercial enterprises, balancing profit motives against rigid imperial mandates. The lower tiers were dominated by industrial workers, miners and servitors, cybernetic constructs often repurposed from criminals or the deceased, who performed dangerous or menial tasks. This stratification was visibly marked by attire, personal equipment, and even physical modifications, such as implanted vox communicators or bio-enhanced limbs, all reflecting the wearer's social and occupational role. Surveillance was omnipresent, with servo skulls patrolling hallways and streets, transmitting real-time data to control centres staffed by tech priests and security analysts. In many cases, Hive authorities deployed psychically attuned inquisitors or sanctioned rogue psychers to identify latent threats. These agencies often operated with overlapping jurisdictions, creating bureaucratic competition that could lead to corruption, factionalism, and occasional violent clashes within the city. Infrastructural logistics remained one of the most complex challenges. Power grids had to supply energy for lighting, manufacturing, life support, and defense systems around the clock, with built-in redundancies to counter equipment failures or sabotage. Backup fusion cores were standard, maintained by Adeptus Mechanicus personnel who performed routine calibrations and emergency repairs. Water reclamation and atmospheric purification systems were designed to recycle every possible molecule, including condensate from sweat and exhaled breath, processed through biofiltration units and nanite scrubbing arrays. Waste management was handled through pneumatic networks that funneled refuse into industrial incinerators or chemical digesters, but these systems were prone to clogging or malfunction, creating hazardous zones especially in lower hive sectors. Transportation infrastructure, including maglev trains and vertical lifts, operated according to precise schedules controlled by cogitator networks to prevent traffic jams and accidents in the city's dense, multi-tiered environment. Trade and production were deeply interconnected within hive economies. Manufactorums often specialised in particular industrial sectors, with certain hive cities becoming renowned for specific products, be it armaments, vehicles, or industrial chemicals. Trade guilds controlled resource allocation and negotiated inter-hive commerce, balancing supply shortages against imperial quotas and local demands. Raw materials, frequently imported via orbital ports, were stockpiled in massive warehouses and distributed through automated conveyors or servitor-operated forklifts. Finished products moved through designated freight corridors, often protected by armed patrols to prevent theft or sabotage. Marketplaces existed but were heavily regulated. Black markets and illegal trade thrived in shadowed areas, particularly in the Underhive, where law enforcement presence was weak or non-existent. These illicit economies supplied outlaw gangs and fringe communities with contraband goods, fostering a parallel ecosystem beneath the veneer of imperial order. Living conditions in the Hab blocks varied drastically depending on tier and occupation. Upper-level residences, often reserved for planetary administrators and ecclesiarchs, featured artificial environments with regulated atmospheres, gravity controls, and luxurious amenities. In stark contrast, the majority of the population endured cramped, poorly ventilated quarters with minimal access to natural light or fresh air. The vertical architecture of hive cities is a marvel of engineering, driven by necessity rather than aesthetics. Layers of habitation, industry, and infrastructure stack relentlessly upward and downward, creating towering megastructures that can pierce planetary atmospheres or delve deep beneath the surface. The upper spires, often called the Upper Hive, house the political elite, ecclesiarchy offices, and high-ranking Adeptus Mechanicus lodges. These levels benefit from advanced environmental controls, clean air filtration, and constant maintenance. They also feature defensive fortifications, including void shields and automated gun batteries, designed to withstand orbital bombardments or insurgent attacks. As the structures descend into the mid-hive and eventually the lower hive, living and working conditions degrade sharply. The lower levels are dense with manufactorums, refineries and hab blocks crammed with industrial workers. These sections suffer from poor air quality, frequent mechanical failures and structural instability, often requiring constant repair crews to stave off collapse. Power distribution within hive cities is a critical and complex operation. Energy production facilities, often fusion reactors or plasma turbines, are located near the base or central cores of the hive structure. These power sources generate immense energy, which is channeled through layered conduit networks embedded within the hive's walls and floors. Redundant feed lines ensure continuous supply even if sections are damaged or sabotaged, while capacitors store excess energy for peak demand. The Adeptus Mechanicus oversee these grids with near-religious devotion, interpreting energy flow data as part of their sacred rites. Any disruption to power, whether from technical failure or attack, risks catastrophic collapse of life support, lighting, and manufacturing capabilities. Secondary power nodes situated in the mid and lower hive serve localized systems, but the overall network remains vulnerable to coordinated assaults or severe technical breakdowns, a risk that governments accept as a necessary trade-off for their megastructure's scale. Traffic systems within hive cities are an intricate ballet of vertical and horizontal movement. Maglev trains run through horizontal tunnels in the mid-hive, ferrying thousands of workers and cargo daily across industrial zones. These trains are heavily monitored and operate on strict schedules to avoid accidents or delays. Vertical transport is managed by a network of lifts and elevator shafts, capable of moving hundreds of individuals simultaneously. High-capacity lifts in the upper hive are often prioritized for elites, while industrial lifts in the lower levels operate at higher speeds but with minimal comfort or safety. Conveyor belts and automated carts supplement human transport, especially in manufacturing sectors. Streets in the mid and lower hive are crowded, noisy and congested, with human traffic mixed with servitors, vehicles and beasts of burden. Traffic management relies heavily on servo-skull overseers and automated systems to enforce flow patterns and clear pathways, yet bottlenecks and accidents remain common, especially during shift changes or crises. Architectural designs prioritize functionality and defense over comfort or beauty, reflecting the harsh priorities of Imperial society. Ceramite and plasteel are the principal materials chosen for their durability and resistance to wear, corrosion and fire. Massive support pylons and buttresses are interwoven with hab blocks and manufactorums, allowing the city to bear immense vertical loads. Internal layouts emphasize compartmentalization. Sealed sectors can be isolated in emergencies to contain fires, toxic leaks, or infestations. The external facade is often jagged and irregular, formed by successive expansions, repairs, and emergency modifications. Windows are rare and small, primarily serving ventilation or minimal natural lighting, with most illumination provided by artificial sources such as plasma lamps or bioluminescent panels. The austere visual style, dominated by harsh industrial lines and exposed piping, conveys the hive's function as a bastion of production and control rather than a place of human comfort. Social stratification within a hive city is not just an outcome of economic imbalance, it is engineered into the physical structure and daily function of the hive itself. From the godlike planetary governors to the lowest mutant scum in the sump, every individual has a place and a purpose, whether they realize it or not. The ruling elite reside in the spires, a gleaming illusion of imperial order and purity, far removed from the rust-choked masses below. These upper levels host the noble houses, high-ranking Administratum officials, ecclesiarchy clergy, and senior members of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Here, polished black marble floors reflect stained glass depictions of the Emperor's triumphs, while servo-servants glide silently between banquet halls and delta looms. At this altitude, even the air smells engineered, filtered, perfumed, and cooled. Few Spireborn ever set foot in the lower levels, and even fewer understand the cost of their privilege. Beneath them, in the mid-hive, lies the bureaucratic middle class: clerks, tech adepts, mid-tier arbitrators, manufactorum overseers, and skilled labourers. This stratum supports the hive's internal function, and keeps records flowing through the Administratum's vast paper-choked arteries. Life here is cramped and laborious, but relatively secure. Hab blocks are tightly packed, with walls thin enough to hear your neighbours argue, pray, or scream. Food comes in pre-processed ration cubes, nutrient paste, or recycled synth meat, enough to sustain life and little more. Educational access is restricted and primarily vocational, focused on training for specific manufacturum tasks or data entry roles. Social mobility is a theoretical construct, not a practical one. Advancement exists but is rare, typically requiring sacrifice, betrayal, or blind loyalty to a superior. The lower hive is an ecosystem of desperation, brutal labour, and institutional neglect. It is here that the largest population density exists, crammed into endless corridors of ferrocrete, rusted girders, and flickering lumen strips. Labourers toil in titanic assembly lines for 18-hour shifts, manufacturing lasgun parts, armour plating, or promethium tubes under the watch of armed foremen and servitor enforcers. The air is thick with industrial fumes and unfiltered exhaust. Life expectancy drops sharply in these regions. 40 years is considered fortunate. Medical services are scarce, mostly handled by crude cyberchirurgeons or unlicensed Medicaid practitioners with reused tools and little training. Workers often rely on synthetic stimulants to stay conscious and functional, creating rampant addiction issues the authorities ignore unless productivity drops. The labour system is enforced through a mixture of religious indoctrination and brute force. The ecclesiarchy maintains shrines and vox prayer networks throughout the hive, broadcasting hymns and mantras extolling the sanctity of work, the nobility of sacrifice, and the emperor's eternal vigilance. Sermons often include historical parables of martyrs who died to keep the manufacturums running, subtly reinforcing the notion that death in service is preferable to dissent. Arbitrators patrol the hab sectors in the lower hive, armed with shock mauls, suppression shields, and bolt pistols. Their presence is a constant reminder that disobedience invites immediate and violent correction. Infractions such as lateness, theft, or seditious speech are punished swiftly, often publicly. Punishments range from forced labour in radiation zones to summary execution, depending on the enforcer's mood and the offender's status. Skill specialisation emerges not from choice, but from enforced necessity. A child born in the Lascabin Manufactorum wing is likely to die there, having spent their life assembling trigger housings or wiring ignition coils. Training begins early, often before adolescence, and is geared toward narrow, repetitive tasks. Over time, workers become so proficient in their assigned roles that deviation becomes impossible. Even minor reassignments can cause psychological breakdowns or fatal errors. In contrast, the spire dwellers receive formal educations through Mechanicus-approved institutions, learning politics, law, and philosophy, subjects forbidden to the masses. This disparity creates not only skill gaps, but vast differences in cultural knowledge, identity, and even perception of the Imperium itself. Despite the rigid caste system, the hive's economy depends on countless informal and illegal arrangements. Black markets thrive in the lower hive, exchanging everything from ammunition and counterfeit ration tokens to rare tech remnants and off-world spices. Smugglers and gang lords operate with impunity in certain sectors, often bribing officials or collaborating with corrupt arbets. Labourers supplement their meagre wages with trade in scavenged parts or stolen materials, creating a fragile parallel economy that props up areas the Administratum has abandoned. In some cases, even minor disruptions to these underground systems, such as a gang war or arbitrator purge, can bring entire sectors to a halt, revealing just how brittle the hive's official structures truly are. Culture within a hive city is fragmented, shaped by strata, labour, local traditions, and centuries of isolation between sectors. In the upper levels, cultural identity is a curated artifact. Nobles sponsor performances of ancient Terran operas, preserve dialects dead elsewhere in the galaxy, and participate in exaggerated rituals of etiquette and honour. Social interaction is rigidly formalised. House alliances and rivalries are maintained through symbolic marriages, vendettas, and game theory diplomacy played out over generations. Spire dwellers tend to see themselves as stewards of Imperial culture, preservers of civility in a decaying galaxy. Their religious devotion is performative but powerful, tied into lineage, legacy, and divine mandate. They dress in ornate silks, gene-coded robes, or armour-shaped fashion, often laced with electrofilaments or privacy field generators. In stark contrast, the lower hive's cultural life is raw and function-driven. With little time or space for luxury, traditions become stripped-down reflections of survival. Music, storytelling, and ritual are passed on, often evolving around gang rights, scavenging victories, or communal endurance. Names of dead workers become rallying cries or cautionary parables. Superstition runs rampant, with countless localized cults blending imperial dogma with ancestral totems, tech ghost myths, or mutated saint figures. Art and graffiti bloom in surprising forms, corridor murals using chemical slurries, devotionals etched with auto-knives, or elaborate ink tattoos that tell family histories and crimes committed. Fashion is functional. Repurposed work gear, hazard suits, scavenged flak, or ceremonial masks made from broken servitor parts. Leisure in the hive is almost an oxymoron, but it exists. In the middle hives, sanctioned entertainments include low-band vox dramas, reruns of propaganda reels, and mechanized blood sports. Below, the definition of entertainment is closer to release: pit fights, contraband stim dens, or makeshift gambling pits operated by gang syndicates. Some participate in group rituals to appease spirits of the machine or invoke local protectors, a blend of desperation and inherited faith. Ecclesiarchy-approved shrines offer spiritual solace, but only in areas not overrun by crime or heresy. The Adeptus Ministorum often funds pageants, fasting cycles, and mass recitations of the Imperial Creed, using ritual as both a pressure valve and a control mechanism. Participation in these events is not always voluntary. Failing to attend can mark a worker as deviant or invite sanction from local enforcers. The psychological toll of hive life is immense. High population density, constant surveillance, inadequate nutrition, and overexposure to toxic industrial materials lead to both physical and cognitive degeneration. Chronic fatigue, chemical dependency, respiratory illnesses, and techno-stress disorders are widespread. Suicide rates, though suppressed in official reports, are high in many sectors, especially following work cycle audits or leadership purges. The average worker is sustained not by hope, but by inertia, too broken to rebel, too afraid to die. Children are often born into environmental trauma, noise pollution from mining drills, gas leaks from failed filtration systems, or localized radiation bursts from decaying power cores. The effects are multi-generational, both biological and social, and rarely treated. Production centres form the economic heart of a hive city. These manufacturums produce weapons, armour, industrial equipment, data slates, servitors, reprocessed plasteel, and synthetic chemicals. Some hives specialise in war material, laser-gun barrels, grenade primer, or Lehman-Russ hull components, while others focus on resource refinement or macro-food synthesis. Productivity is monitored by both Mechanicus tech priests and Administratum logisters, who evaluate sector output against planetary quotas. A single production wing may employ millions and be several kilometres across, serviced by conveyor systems, servitor fleets, and automated machine spirits too ancient to reprogram. Breakdowns are common and often fatal. When output dips below target for more than 2 cycles, enforcer squads are deployed to motivate personnel, or the local overseer is purged in a ceremony meant as both punishment and example. Trade between hives occurs primarily through magrail systems, suborbital freight haulers, and rare sanctioned land convoys. Resources are allocated based on planetary scale efficiency models. Surpluses from Hive Ferolius, for example, might supply raw adamantium to Hive Carsis, which lacks mines but excels in vehicle plating. Inter-hive rivalries often arise when quotas are missed, or cargo is intercepted by rogue elements, sometimes escalating into resource skirmishes or data sabotage campaigns. Imperial overseers, when present, step in only when planetary output is endangered. Otherwise, these localized economic tensions are permitted to burn themselves out. In some cases, hives have been known to secretly hoard surplus to leverage against off-world tithes or negotiate with rogue traders. This is officially heretical, but practically tolerated if it benefits the wider war effort. The broader function of hive cities within the Imperium is both industrial and logistical. Each hive is a node in a network of planetary resource management, linking mineral harvest zones, atmospheric processors, orbital elevators, and supply depots. While Forge worlds specialize in advanced mechanicus tech and agri-worlds feed the stars, hive worlds provide the human fuel, weapons, armor, spare parts, and the bodies to use them. Billions of soldiers, workers, and servitors are born, broken, and buried within these cities, each one a slow-burning engine in the war machine of the Imperium. They are not sustainable in any ecological sense, nor are they intended to be. Hive cities are designed to burn through generations for 1,000 years or more, until they collapse into necropoli or are consumed by rebellion, then replaced, if at all, by newer cities or fortified ruins repurposed for defense. Beneath every hive city, beyond the sanctioned hab layers and manufactorum sectors, lies a realm born not of design, but of entropy. The underhive is not a place, it is a consequence. As hive cities expand upward and outward, their foundations rot in neglect. Pressure, time, industrial runoff, tectonic instability, and centuries of refuse accumulation conspire to erode structure into chaos. Maintenance records are lost. Infrastructure becomes unserviceable. Automated systems, long severed from central control, operate erratically or not at all. Collapsed corridors turn into tunnels, broken support struts become the framework of new settlements. What begins as simple structural abandonment grows into a separate world with its own rules, dangers, and economies, an unregulated biome of human fallout. The origin of the underhive can be traced to the earlier cycles of expansion during the age of technology. Early hive cities, more modest in scale but still enormous by modern standards, were initially constructed with tiered redundancy. Lower zones were built to bear the weight of upper levels and housecore infrastructure. As planetary populations soared and vertical construction became the dominant solution, the lower sections were not reinforced but buried. Terraforming engines created temporary stability, but once those subsystems were decommissioned or cannibalized for resources, atmospheric pressure and gravity began crushing the lower architecture. Generational neglect compounded this collapse. Whole districts were sealed off after reactor leaks or biocontamination events. Civil wars during the Age of Strife sent many early hab blocks into disuse, while orbital bombardments left cavernous impact zones repurposed by survivors. Over time, this abandoned infrastructure became populated again, not by decree, but by desperation. Outcasts, mutants, criminals, and those rejected by the hive's rigid caste system trickled downward in a steady exodus. Without proper lighting, ventilation, or access to clean resources, these early squatters built a culture of salvage and improvisation. Entire settlements exist around ancient sump reactors, pipe networks, or data caches. In the oldest zones, you can find human enclaves dwelling in upended ventilation shafts or living off nutrient mold grown from thermal vents. Settlements are frequently rebuilt using scrap from surface raids or remnants of collapsed floors. Rooms are held together with resin gel, weld lines, and faith. Water is harvested from rust leeches or condensed from coolant mist. Electricity is siphoned, traded, or fought over. Localized tech priests may even rule micro-communities as demigods based on their ability to keep generators online. Geographically, no two underhives are the same. Some are craterous vertical shafts stretching kilometers deep. Others are endless tangles of low-hanging corridors and slanted debris fields. The further down one goes, the more unstable and anarchic the environment becomes. Common features include sump swamps, toxic chemical pools inhabited by predatory fauna or parasitic mold, collapsed transport tubes, machine temples from long-lost mechanicus cults, and hollowed-out recycling silos turned into black markets or ritual arenas. There are zones filled entirely with static discharge or permanent darkness due to broken lumen grid overlays. Gravity can fluctuate in certain zones due to reactor flux, creating lightless voids or pressure-locked tombs. Some underhive regions still echo with the sounds of autoloaders or conveyor belts that no longer have purpose. Environmentally, these zones are brutal. Air quality is universally poor, with breathable pockets localized to major settlements or jury-rigged filtration systems. Gas leaks are common, often killing dozens before anyone notices. Many underhivers wear makeshift respirators, often barely functional or repurposed from old rebreather units. Lighting is scarce and unreliable. Phosphor lanterns, chem torches, or glow mats are precious commodities. Visibility beyond 20 meters is rare. Noise is unpredictable. Some regions are deathly silent, while others echo with industrial groans or machine spirits grinding in confusion. Wildlife varies wildly. Giant rats, sump leeches, spore crabs, and more exotic, mutated predators prowl the dark. These creatures feed on refuse or flesh and are often highly aggressive due to resource competition. There are confirmed accounts of amble nests, zoanthrope escapees, and even corrupted servitors programmed only to kill. The human inhabitants of the Underhive are a microcosm of evolution under pressure. Over generations, they adapt physically and psychologically to the environment. Average Underhivers are shorter, often lean but wiry, with skin tone altered by ambient radiation or fungal exposure. Greys, greens, or pallid blue hues are not uncommon. Eyes become enlarged or sunken, hair thins, and mutations, ranging from benign deformities to borderline heretical aberrations, occur with regularity. Socially, these populations develop hardened, mistrustful cultures. Language drifts into dialects, often incomprehensible to those from the upper levels. Honour and betrayal coexist as survival tools. Religion warps. The emperor is worshipped, but often through lenses that blend ancestral memory, totemic symbology, or machine reverence. Some factions reject the Imperium entirely, forming splinter cults that revere entropy, chaos, or ancient tech. The economy of the Underhive is based almost entirely on salvage and barter. Imperial currency has little value except in dealings with sanctioned traders. More common is the use of creds, trade chips, or direct exchanges. Food for ammo, water for medicine, scrap for protection. Tech scavengers, known as scroungers, cograts, or rust priests depending on region, are among the most respected and hunted professions. Their skill at disarming traps, decoding ancient terminals, or safely removing power cells determines a settlement's survival. Trade hubs form around key access points, old elevators, functioning mag lifts, or surface connection shafts. These locations are guarded obsessively and can spark open war between gangs or clan factions. The further one goes from such nodes, the more isolated and lawless the environment becomes. In the absence of imperial law, gang culture becomes the dominant form of social organisation in the Underhive. These gangs vary in size, purpose, and structure, but all operate as both community and militia. Some are remnants of old worker unions or security details, now twisted into armed collectives. Others form organically around strong leaders, or localised resources such as weapon caches or water filtration hubs. Gang names carry weight. House Goliath, House Escher, House Orlok, and others are infamous not only on Necromunda, but across dozens of hive worlds. These houses maintain bloodlines, forge alliances with surface factions, and sometimes receive clandestine support from nobles or rogue Adeptus officials looking to manipulate the hive's dark economy. A gang's power is measured by its territory, arsenal, and notoriety. The largest gangs control entire districts, enforce tax systems, and regulate salvage rights. These zones often look like militarized enclaves, armed checkpoints made from ferrocrete barricades, servo turrets scavenged from agridrones, and graffiti-laced murals that serve both as warnings and historical record. Skirmishes are common and often ritualized. Honor duels, ambush raids, and vendetta killings form part of daily life. Victory means status, while loss typically means death, exile, or forced absorption into the victor's ranks. Younger gangers are often subjected to brutal rites of passage, such as sump crawls or toxin lung endurance trials, to prove loyalty and toughness. Gang hierarchy is meritocratic but violent. Leadership is typically earned through combat, resource acquisition, or inheritance. Beneath the leaders are enforcers, hardened killers or tacticians, and foot soldiers, often juveniles or debt-bound initiates. Some gangs specialize in sabotage, drug manufacture, or smuggling. Others act more like militia forces, maintaining crude order within their borders in exchange for tribute. Not all gangs are criminal by Underhive standards. Some provide relative safety to civilians and even run makeshift schools or infirmaries. Others descend into cult behaviour, worshipping ancient machines or Xenos relics as divine tools of power. Territory in the Underhive is a constant source of conflict. Access to water, functioning power lines, or a sealed surface lift can mean survival for thousands. Gangs establish perimeters using booby traps, trip mines, and sonic alarms made from scrap tech. Some even employ tamed creatures, chemdogs, rad leeches, or lobotomized servitors, as sentries. Tunnel choke points are fortified, and narrow corridors are covered by overlapping fire lanes. Most gang conflicts are fought with low-grade ballistic weaponry, blades, or improvised explosives. Las weapons are rare and treasured. Plasma or melter-class arms are legendary and often non-functional without serious tech support. Ammunition is rationed or hand-loaded, often inconsistent in quality. Law enforcement in the Underhive is inconsistent at best and wholly absent in most zones. The enforcers, descendants of the Hive's original police forces, occasionally conduct raids, but they tend to focus on damage control rather than justice. Their armour is reinforced carapace, designed for toxic zones, and they are often accompanied by cyber mastiffs, servo skulls, and execution servitors. However, enforcers rarely venture far without serious cause. Entire sectors are considered black zones, where official forces are forbidden due to radiation, psychic activity, or lost expeditions. Instead, many Underhivers rely on locally accepted codes of conduct, enforced by gang tribunals or iron voices, neutral arbitrators trained in conflict resolution, and ancient law archives, though their influence is limited and regional. Religion exists in fractured, mutated forms in the Underhive. While the ecclesiarchy maintains some shrines and missionaries in the upper reaches, most faith in the depths is personal and syncretic. Many gangs maintain their own saints or spirits, former champions elevated to divine status through oral tradition. The cult mechanicus is often revered not as a separate entity, but as part of a broader pantheon. Machine relics, like working cogitators or damaged servitors, are treated with holy reverence. Some factions worship hive spirits, seeing the hive as a living organism that punishes or blesses according to its inscrutable will. Chaos cults are not uncommon, especially those offering freedom from mutation stigma or promising power in exchange for loyalty. These cults often operate in cells, hiding behind legitimate scavenger guilds or trade hubs, recruiting from the desperate and mutated alike. Beyond gangs, there are secondary power groups that influence Underhive life. Tech clans are scavenger families that specialize in old-world technology recovery, data decoding, or reactor tuning. They often exist on the margins of gang politics, selling their services to the highest bidder or acting as neutral repair crews during territory negotiations. Water guilds are crucial, controlling filtration systems, dew condensers, and ancient purifier arrays. They're often more politically savvy than violent, but their leverage makes them targets for extortion or subversion. Spook dealers, gene smiths, chem breeders, and gladiator wranglers all contribute to the Underhive's fractured economy. Each fulfills a role once handled by sanctioned Imperial departments, now outsourced through necessity and desperation. Daily life in the Underhive is a constant gamble. Nutrient slop is made from fungal matter, recycled proteins, or insect biomass. Clothing is a patchwork of salvaged materials: flak pads, heat insulation, ceremonial skulls, and hazard stripes from old tech uniforms. Many wear respirator hoods or scavenged helmets, often with broken lenses or decorative additions. Education is oral, often gang-directed and practical: how to reload a las pistol, where to stab a sump lizard, which tunnels are death traps. Trust is rare, alliances are transactional, and betrayal is common. There is no upward mobility, only the illusion of escape through ambition, bloodshed, or external intervention. Beneath the layers of gang warfare and scavenger empires lies something even older: technology and architecture forgotten even by the oldest hive dwellers. These underlayers, often kilometers deep, predate the hive itself. Some are remnants of early age of technology settlements. Others are buried research facilities, abandoned terraforming stations, or failed constructs from the dark age of strife. Explorers refer to these as deep cores or the forgotten tiers. Accessing them usually requires bypassing collapsed sectors, magnetic locks, or corrupted security systems. Occasionally, sudden cave-ins expose these ruins, sending treasure hunters, rogue Mechanicus agents, and cults scrambling to claim the discovery. It is not uncommon for such expeditions to vanish entirely, lost to radiation, feral xenos lifeforms, or ancient automated defense systems still partially functional. These zones are not just historically significant, they're dangerous. Some house STC fragments, ancient machine spirits, or forbidden weapons sealed by early planetary governors. One example comes from Hive Decileum, where a forgotten manufactorum beneath Sector Helica erupted into a 3-week war between a Genestealer cult and a Mechanicus infiltrator cadre attempting to recover a working nanofabricator. In Hive Tertium, an entire mid-hive hab block collapsed when scavenger crews triggered a dormant void shield relay that hadn't been active in over 6 millennia. The Adeptus Mechanicus treats such discoveries with great urgency, often deploying kill teams or task forces to secure or neutralize these finds before others can repurpose them. Despite the risk, the black market value of functional archaeotech drives desperate expeditions regularly. Numerous catastrophic events have shaped Underhive mythology and political geography. One of the most infamous is the ash drain collapse of Hive Borganth, where illegal chem refining tunnels caused a chain reaction that liquefied 3 tiers of the hive into a sludge river of industrial waste, drowning nearly 200,000 underhivers. In Hive Necromunda, the rise of the cult of the Sump Prophet led to a year-long gang war that ultimately resulted in the partial flooding of the lower levels, transforming them into a toxic marshland now inhabited by mutated sump crocodiles and fungal bioluminescent flora. In Decileum, the so-called Feast of Rust incident was caused by a rogue data priest unleashing a corrosion plague on ancient cogitator banks, turning everything in contact into rust vapour, including over 100 inhabitants. These are not isolated events, but systemic consequences of a decaying infrastructure left to fester for millennia. Despite this chaos, the Imperium does not directly intervene. The Underhive serves a function, albeit a brutal one. It absorbs the surplus population, contains criminal and mutant elements, and acts as a pressure release valve for the hive's fragile upper layers. Maintaining full control over a city that spans tens or hundreds of kilometers vertically and laterally is logistically impossible, even for the Adeptus Arbits. Moreover, the Adeptus Mechanicus has little incentive to eliminate these zones. Scavenger gangs often recover lost tech that would otherwise remain unreachable. Some even enter into discreet agreements with tech priests, exchanging archaeotech for rations or oxygen filtration kits. To many in the ruling echelons, the Underhive is a tolerable liability, a self-regulating purgatory. What keeps people in the Underhive despite the risk is a mix of necessity and cultural inertia. For many, the surface is a myth. They were born in the dark, raised by gang elders or scavenger kin, and educated in the brutal rhythms of their environment. Leaving the Underhive requires more than surviving. It requires documentation, passage, and sponsorship from surface factions. Few have the means, fewer still the skills to adapt. Those who do escape often find themselves as outcasts or curiosities above. The stink of sump slick or the tattoos of gang affiliation mark them for life. Others choose to remain out of loyalty, vengeance, or a twisted sense of belonging. After all, a ganger who rules 100 meters of pipe and sludge might have more control than a sanitation worker topside. There are still mysteries left in the Underhive, some bordering on myth. Reports circulate of machines that communicate in binary without power sources, doors that open for no one but close behind the missing, and entire zones that appear overnight and vanish a week later. Servitors long disconnected from their uplinks continue tasks nobody remembers. Ferrous groves, trees of oxidized iron that grow despite lacking soil or sunlight, dot some lower levels and remain unexplained even by the Mechanicus. Myths of the Hollow Kings, ancient techno-barons sleeping in sealed vaults, persist despite being dismissed as superstition, but sometimes these myths lead to real consequences. Expeditions sent to follow up on these rumours have returned with unstable data cores, malfunctioning cyberskulls, or psychic disturbances later investigated by Ordo Hereticus agents. Ultimately, the Underhive is a necropolis of forgotten dreams, a crucible of desperation and mutation, and a microcosm of the Imperium's broader decay. It is where the laws of man falter, where the cult mechanicus reaps what others discard, and where survival is a religion in itself. Every cogitator shard, every last round, every breath is earned. The weak die, the strong adapt, the mad thrive. It is not order, but entropy made manifest, sustained not in spite of the Imperium, but because of it. Hive cities represent the logical endpoint of industrial urbanization, structured with a singular purpose: the relentless production of war material and the preservation of the Imperium's demographic mass. These cities are not designed for comfort or livability. They are mechanized crucibles of survival and indoctrination. Their internal economies operate in closed loops of manufacture, recycling, and human resource management. Labour is the defining metric of value, and every citizen is assigned a role in the endless cycle of production. From the moment of birth, individuals are catalogued into labour guilds, sanctioned vocational tracks, or conscripted penal units. The structure of opportunity is vertical, but rarely mobile. Only through exceptional performance or the favour of the Adeptus Administratum does one ascend the hierarchy, and even then, the social climb often ends in indentured servitude to a different master. The day-to-day existence within a hive is ruled by a combination of guild law, local tradition, and ecclesiarchal doctrine. Inhabitants work 12 to 14-hour shifts within manufacturer or cogitator hives, receiving payment in the form of ration chits, utility access, and protection tokens. Families live in stack habs, 2-metre-tall units outfitted with a recycler port, a bed sarcophagus, and a devotional alcove. Communal hygiene is enforced by block-level administrators known as sanitus preceptors. These individuals are responsible for maintaining ritual purity within waste systems and vent stacks, both to preserve function and to prevent outbreaks of disease or heresy. Water and food are tightly controlled commodities. The most common form of nourishment, known as nutripaste, is synthesized from recycled biomass and engineered to provide minimal sustenance with maximum longevity. Flavoured variants exist but are reserved for guildmasters and honoured servants of the machine god. Education within the hive is sparse and heavily slanted towards indoctrination. From a young age, children are instructed in the catechisms of the Omnissiah and the creeds of the Emperor. Literacy is a privilege afforded to the upper manufacturer levels, or those trained as adeptus scribes. Knowledge of machinery is passed down through apprenticeship rather than formal instruction. The exception is in mechanicus-controlled districts, where the cult of the machine insists upon rigorous dogmatic schooling. In these regions, children undergo binary immersion and neuroscript training, allowing them to interface directly with cogitators by the age of 12. However, such training often comes at the cost of social function, rendering the individual a skilled yet emotionally muted vessel. Outside mechanicus influence, intellectual pursuits are rare, discouraged unless directly useful to hive productivity. The population of a typical hive can range from a few million to tens of billions, stratified into a caste system that is both socially and geographically rigid. The highest spires house planetary governors, nobles, and the ecclesiarchal elite. Beneath them lie the trade consortiums and mercantile guilds, followed by the skilled labourers, then the manufacturing workers, and finally the underhive dwellers. This bottom layer, often lawless and forsaken, serves as both a breeding ground and a dumping ground, a place where failed social experiments, outcasts, and criminals are sent. Despite the horrors, or perhaps because of them, the underhive forms a necessary buffer for the upper city. It absorbs unrest, filters danger, and functions as a proving ground for enforcer squads and bounty hunters. In some hives, the underhive is also the primary source of cultural output. Crude artwork, gang myths, and shrine poetry etched in soot and blood on ferrocrete walls. Criminal activity is endemic to hive life, and its integration into the social fabric is so complete that many crimes are tolerated as long as quotas are met. Gangs operate as alternative power structures, governing sectors abandoned by official enforcer patrols. These gangs are often multi-generational and tied to local identity, with symbols and uniforms passed down like family heirlooms. The weapons they use are scavenged, modified, or mass-produced in illegal forges hidden within old ventilation systems. A basic gang arsenal includes stub guns, homemade flamers, and melee weapons adapted from mining tools. Armour is minimal, often just reinforced jackets or hazard suits repurposed from factory waste. Despite the crude equipment, gang members are deadly due to their familiarity with the terrain and their ruthlessness born of necessity. Some gangs, like the Iron Vultures of Hive Decileum, control entire districts and levy their own taxes. Medical care is reserved for the productive. Most hivers rely on unlicensed medicae, many of whom were trained via oral tradition rather than sanctioned instruction. Authorized medical centers are rare and located near manufacturer, where worker output justifies the expense. Cybernetic replacement is more common than surgical repair, often installed without anesthesia. Limb replacement with servo limbs is incentivized in some sectors due to the perceived increase in productivity. However, these augmentations are frequently defective or improperly calibrated, resulting in higher mortality rates. Psychological care does not exist in any formal sense. Mental instability is treated with medication derived from repurposed combat stimulants or through religious exorcism. For many, the only true respite from suffering is faith, and the most sought-after form of healing is a priest's absolution. Despite the harshness, Hive Cities are capable of generating greatness. Some of the Imperium's most legendary figures hail from Hive backgrounds. Commissar Siaphus Cain, although an outlier in personality, was born in a lower-tier hive and rose to become a celebrated hero. The Adeptus Astartes sometimes recruit from hives, favouring candidates who display cunning, aggression, and a high pain threshold. These individuals are often born in environments where they learn to kill before they can read. Their survival is proof of their suitability. For others, glory comes through martyrdom. Hive-born sisters of battle often originate from shrine orphanages, trained in doctrine and discipline from birth. Their presence in a hive is both inspirational and terrifying. It reminds citizens that salvation is possible, but only through absolute devotion and sacrifice. The cultural memory of hive life is short, shaped by immediate need and generational amnesia. Oral histories are more prevalent than written records, passed down in work songs, murals, and whispered tales. Holidays are few, and most are tied to production milestones or sanctioned executions. Faith festivals are tightly controlled to prevent them from escalating into riots. Despite the bleakness, community bonds do form, based on shared trauma, loyalty to work crews, or mutual protection pacts. Hive society does not allow for sentimentality, but it does reward resilience. In this unforgiving environment, every small victory, a day without rations being cut, a child surviving to adolescence, a shift ending without fatalities, is a form of triumph. And for the vast majority of hive dwellers, that is enough. Among the most iconic hive cities in the Imperium is Hive Primus on Necromunda. Constructed during the later stages of the Dark Age of technology, Hive Primus originally served as a key manufacturing node for advanced terraforming equipment and prototype voidcraft systems. In the modern era, it is a grotesque skeleton of its former glory, yet it remains critically important for its output of las weapons, promethium canisters, and mass-processed plasteel. The city rises nearly 10 kilometers into the stratosphere, its segmented spires supported by a web of reinforced adamantium pylons and buttresses. These supports are not only architectural necessities but sacred objects of worship for certain Mechanicus sects who maintain them with ritual precision. The political structure of Hive Primus is overseen by House Helmar, a dynastic aristocracy whose rule extends beyond the hive into Necromunda's orbital facilities. Despite their affluence, the Helmar family is locked in a perpetual power balancing act between various noble houses, the Adeptus Arbits, and the subterranean gang cultures that feed off the hive's structural underbelly. Other notable hives include Hive Tertium on Atoma Prime, famous or infamous for its failure to control rampant heretical corruption and subsequent purgation by the Inquisition. Originally constructed as a bastion of Mechanicus design, Hive Tertium once boasted some of the most advanced cogitator nexuses and reactor stacks seen in Segmentum Pacificus. However, its internal guild politics degenerated into a cultic insurrection that resulted in the deployment of multiple Astra Militarum regiments, followed by inquisitorial extermination protocols. What remains of Hive Tertium today is largely ash and radioactive sludge, yet parts of its underground railways and generator cores are rumoured to have survived. These areas are often visited by rogue traders, archaeotech prospectors, and penal recon teams, though few return. The fall of Hive Tertium stands as a lesson to many Imperial planners on the dangers of autonomous governance within high-capacity hive systems. Hive Decileum, by contrast, is a study in sustained decay. Built during the Great Crusade as a logistics hub for resupplying Crusade fleets, its original function was to produce mass-packaged nutrients, ammunition, and auto-servitors. Over time, Decileum's economy devolved into feudalism under the guise of contract law. Every citizen is bound by a web of service debt contracts, lifelong obligations that dictate everything from one's food rations to their marital options. The social strata of Hive Decileum are mirrored in its vertical zoning. The upper tiers, still somewhat functional, are managed by trade cartels and sanctified manufacturer. The lower zones have entirely collapsed into brutalist gang territory. Despite the decay, the Hive continues to meet its quotas, and for this reason, the Adeptus Administratum allows it to persist. The Iron Vultures, one of the most notorious Hive gangs, have even entered into unofficial agreements with surface merchants providing security for cargo in exchange for raw materials and contraband. Other less stable Hive constructs litter the Imperium, like the failed Hive Antioch on the quarantined moon of Mycaria. Antioch was designed as a testbed for full AI-augmented Hive functions during the waning days of the Age of Technology. After the activation of its central machine core, later determined to be a self-aware abominable intelligence, the Hive began systemically altering its internal architecture, consuming organic inhabitants to increase mechanical efficiency. Before long, Antioch ceased responding to off-world communications. The Mechanicus deployed multiple containment teams, none of which returned. The moon is now sealed under Holy Edict, patrolled by Martian fleets, and officially does not exist on Imperial star charts. Even among senior tech priests, speaking the name Antioch without clearance is a punishable offence. Each hive leaves behind a cultural legacy unique to its planet and purpose. The towering Gothic exoskeletons, the modular internal grids, and the ubiquitous servoskull sentries define not only the skyline, but also the psyche of their inhabitants. They forge character through attrition. The very act of surviving within such structures breeds individuals of remarkable tenacity or madness. Their flaws, overcrowding, corruption, subsistence living, are balanced by their role as the engines of the Imperium's continued war effort. They are more than cities. They are monuments to endurance, industry, and controlled entropy. Even in their collapse, they remain indispensable.